Just a disclaimer, the opinions expressed in this podcast are our own views and views of our guests. Nothing in this podcast is to be taken as legal advice.
LexisNexis is a proud sponsor of That's Just Criminal podcast. Remember, AI won't replace lawyers, but lawyers using AI will. Make LexisNexis your preferred legal AI research and productivity technology partner. Find out more at lexisnexis.co.nz. The That's Just Criminal podcast is proudly sponsored by the Criminal Bar Association of New Zealand. The CBA was set up in 1984 and provides support and collegiality to criminal practitioners in New Zealand, whether they are defence lawyers, prosecutors, judges, academics or students. For more information, visit www.criminalbar.org.nz. Now let's get on with the episode.
So a large part of our time is sitting down, going through that evidence, either printing it or reading it on screen. So nothing like TV.
That's a pretty shit TV show.
Yeah,
the channels.
I don't think you're going to be renewed for season 2.
No, exactly. There's very few brothels or private yachts, private jets and helicopters. No Ferraris. It's quite dull.
When you
most of the
say
time.
very few, like, is there a private jet anywhere?
I don't think I can talk about it.
Kia ora, welcome to That's Just Criminal. I'm Sumudu Thode and I'm here with my co-host,
Annabel Cresswell. Today in the studio with us, we have private investigator Tim McKinnel. To some of us in the criminal law world, he will need no introduction. The theme of today's podcast is private investigators and the defence lawyer's relationship with them. So Tim McKinnel is here as probably the most well-known private investigator in New Zealand. He has been involved with exposing miscarriages of justice in some massively high-profile cases, including the Alan Hall, Tina Pora, and the recent Stephen Stone and Gail Maney case. So welcome to the studio, Tim McKinnel.
Wonderful to be here.
Defence lawyers know how professional investigators can help their clients in their cases. For the general public that are listening, how can a private investigator or professional investigator help?
In many ways, a large part of our work is building relationships and collecting information and evidence from people that might not normally speak to the police or other state agencies.
And it could be, like, say, taking photos or videos, drone footage, things like that as well?
Yep. So we do quite a lot of that. We'll do scene examinations. We'll go in and review things. One of the things that we see more and more now is that police are under such pressure with the lack of resourcing that they're not doing the basics all of the time. And so we get called in to do scene examinations, take photographs. One of the things I've noticed that's changed a lot over the last 10 years is the role of technology. And so you're collecting CCTV footage, managing phones and laptops and other technology where the whole vast amounts of evidence. Social media, yep. I've worked out that I'm too old to properly understand social media. So we've got analysts that we work with to do that for us because trying to keep on top of all the apps is just well beyond me these days.
I think members of the public would be saying, well, how often are you using private investigators? I would say I use private investigators so regularly that the private investigator that I use, I now go on holiday with him at the end of each year, have long dinners with red wine with him and his wife, and our children are friends. That's how friendly we have got over time. And I had to get to know his family because his wife passed a message to me through him saying, why do I keep sending him to brothels? It was because I had a number of cases where, you know, he needed to interview people that work in brothels to get to the heart of the matter. And so I had to be like, really, it's not dodgy. Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Annabel. And we've been friends.
Did you start by saying I've never sent him to a brothel?
Yeah, I know. I was really tempted, but not worth it.
But you still want him to keep doing your work.
Yes, he's too important to me to mess with that relationship. And we got really tight over a miscarriage of justice, not a high-profile one like you, but one where a young, vulnerable boy was charged with something he didn't do. And the two of us were just obsessed because we could see it and no one would believe us until eventually. And I'm imagining you've had similar things and similar relationships with lawyers when you've worked on cases like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have become and remain friends with a lot of my clients. The Tainer Porter case, Jonathan Krebs and Ingrid Squire and I went to London together for the Privy Council hearing, and we aside from the pressure of the case, we got on wonderfully, and we still keep in touch, and we're on WhatsApp together. And likewise with Alan Hall's case and Stephen and Gail's case, I'm good friends with all of the lawyers. Will remain so, I'm sure.
Yeah, because you're just in that coal face kind of together, aren't you? Similar to the sort of trauma bonds that you would have had maybe in the police.
Yeah, you see it in the police and, in the medical field and other fields as well. But it's absolutely that. And it's difficult to explain to people that haven't worked on a difficult case, and whether that's a miscarriage or an appeal or simply a serious large scale trial. It's so incredibly intense. There's so many difficult decisions having to be made on a daily basis that you can't help but form a bond. And that's part of what I enjoy about the work.
So then, just talking about, you used to obviously be a police officer. Are you basically seen as being on the other side now, like the dark side by police?
Yeah, I think we've progressed a little bit. I left in 2005, so I've been out 20 years. And that was very much the prevailing view then, that you're a mercenary and you'd sold out to the other side. But, we were never particularly complimentary about defence lawyers when I was in the police. I've still got some very good friends in the police who I trust implicitly. And every now and again, they can't help teasing me. I've been hit up a couple of times in social situations, which is a bit unpleasant. And I know that there's been the odd anonymous call to media outlets about me. So you hear those little things fed back through. And you just sort of have to shrug it off. And I guess if you're not doing that, it's the same for you both. If you're not getting those sort of adverse reactions from time to time, you're probably not pushing hard enough.
You don't know how to use social media, so you don't know what's being said out there.
No, well, I called it tic-tac the other day, and my children just about fell over with laughter. So, yeah, I struggle a little bit. The social situation was... a particularly drunk police officer just sort of came up to me, and it was the usual lines, the lines that you've had before. How do you sleep at night? I can't believe you do what you do. And it was an occasion where I drank less than her and didn't sort of take too much exception to it. I think probably the thing that strikes me the most is, and this has come over the last sort of 10 years, so not exclusively, but predominantly specialised in miscarriage cases, and looking back at what has been hidden from Defence Counsel. And sometimes, or more often than not, Defence Counsel didn't have an investigator on the case in the first place. It's understandable, but on other occasions there's been blatant hiding of really crucial documents and material and interviews and those sorts of things. That really surprised me, because the offices I worked in, people weren't like that as far as I knew. People were pretty honest and pretty straight, and they would make mistakes. But what I've seen over the last few years is worrying, whether that's a result of deliberate withholding of information or, something less troubling. I'm not sure.
Sometimes it's a fine line between massive incompetence and bad faith is what the legal term is.
Yeah, and it moves between incompetence, and it's that confirmation bias and myopia. It's human frailty. We're all at risk of it all of the time. But it's particularly bad when you're in an organisation with the power that the police have got, and they make their mind up, and they've made a decision. They know who did it, and now they just need to set about proving it.
Backwards as opposed to working forwards.
I mean, they call it just cause corruption in academia, and corruption's a strong word that everybody bristles at. And that goes with withholding information and evidence as well, that we've already got the right person. We don't want games played in the lead up to the trial, so it's just bury it. And that happens. And it's a blurry line between whether that's corruption and competence or something in between.
Exactly. It's a fine line. And because you see it on TV shows all the time, that the detective will believe so much that they've got the right guy, but they don't have the evidence. So then they plant the evidence to, they are being corrupt, but they believe they're doing the right thing. And I think that comes up at a more subtle level. That comes up quite a bit, I think. If police are being dodgy, it's often they really believe they're doing the right thing, not disclosing stuff or whatever it might be. One of the most common questions I got asked when we told people we were going to be speaking to you was, is it like on TV? Are you a PI like on TV? What would your answer to that be?
I wish I had a nice car, and I don't need a gun, but for the most part, except when you're out interviewing people or doing a scene exam, you drive a computer, sit at your desk. So a large part of our time is sitting down, going through that evidence, either printing it or reading it on screen. So nothing like TV.
That's a pretty shit TV show.
Yeah,
switching the
I
channels.
don't think you're going to be renewed for season 2.
No, exactly. There's very few brothels or private yachts, private jets and helicopters, no Ferraris. It's quite dull.
When you
most of the
say
time.
very few, like, is there a private jet anywhere?
I don't think I can talk about it.
What's one of the worst jobs? And you can interpret worst in many different ways, but what's the worst job you've ever had?
Outside of the ones that everyone knows about.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of wrongful conviction cases. One in particular that really bothers me. The Crown Law have resisted it to a ridiculous extent, and they've taken a position that is opposite of their position years ago. Because now it doesn't suit, because there's compensation claim in place, and the types of arguments they're mounting are frankly insulting. And
well, if you're talking about the case I think we know about, it's crazy. They're coming out with crazy arguments now.
And it's so dispiriting because for the most part, I'd like to think that most of the people that work in high levels of criminal justice have a heart and soul, but they're making these crazy arguments that are just disheartening and disappointing. So those are the worst for me, where you win some, you lose some, but it's when and it's obvious to anybody objective what has happened, and it's still not accepted. It really is a difficult thing to deal with. They're an incredibly powerful institution. They have an obligation to do what is right, both for victims and for wider society. What I find they do most often is they pretend they can't see the obvious, and that's what really gets me, because they're smart people. I know they can see it, and if they can't see it, they're in the wrong job.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever had to do as a private investigator?
Weird's probably not the right word, but I was away. I spent some time working overseas for an NGO, and I got a weird text message in the middle of the night telling me that the organisation I was working for was being followed daily, weekly, monthly, and had been for years. That was a weird job, because the job then was to try and catch a team of private investigators that were surveilling. It was Greenpeace. It's no secret. It was publicised at the time. It was surveilling Greenpeace on behalf of oil companies in a really creepy way. And so, in effect, we set up a reverse sting to catch the surveillance team surveilling all of our people.
Okay, this needs a podcast of its own. Because I want to know the whole. Or has there already been one?
Oh no, there hasn't. It's been reported. It was reported in the media. It was a few years ago, and I think there's a few sensitivities around it. Might be another reason I'm not that popular in the industry, because we had to sell surveillance vehicles and all those sorts of things. It was a highly entertaining job at the time, though. We had a great deal of fun, because we sent them out on this goose chase for 3 days, followed them, filmed them. It took us less than 3 hours to work out who they were and what they were doing, and then we spent the next 2 days taking them, because they'd assumed that Greenpeace were going to be climbing on something or abseiling down something, so we took them to ropes courses and
I see.
to marinas them. And then filmed them filming us.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it was a weird, interesting job, and I think it raised a whole lot of pretty important questions about how the wealthy can employ people like me to collect information on people.
Yeah, well, I recently listened to a podcast called Elon's Spies. Don't know if you've heard of that, but by Thode Investigates. But that was about Elon Musk's use of spies, and he's used it for at Tesla or wherever, and big international things, but also when he was dating Amber Heard and she was filming in Australia, he had Australian PIs following her everywhere to make sure she didn't cheat on him. I think once you get into international law, though, it's getting more murky, isn't it? And it's only extremely wealthy people that can afford to be using international spies effectively. So it's a tool for the wealthy.
Yeah, it is. And that's what it was here. Oil companies were funding for years the following of young men and women in New Zealand who were going about their lawful business, apart from the odd protest, which was, overt and there for all to see. And they were being followed in a way that was completely unnecessary.
Did you catch them catching you, catching them?
They ended up on the Herald and on TVNZ News, and there was a back and forth through the courts. And I think it was that the matter was settled Yeah, so I was contracted to Greenpeace, so I was leading some work for Greenpeace, an international program looking at environmental and labour breaches in the tuna fishing industry. It was truly global. We did some fascinating stuff in Southeast Asia and Mauritius, and some pretty risky stuff too.
Like what?
Well, I remember landing in one country and explaining because part of the risk assessment process was managing legal risk. So we'd land in a country and we'd go and see a lawyer, criminal lawyer, and say, look, this is what we're going to do. And they'd say, well, if you get caught, this is what will happen. And so on an occasion or two, we got pretty clear advice that if you get caught, you might be stuck in prison for 2 years waiting for trial. And then if you get convicted, it might not go well for you either. I remember one case where we were trying to do a bit of an undercover sting on a dodgy fishing operation that were people smuggling. And so we were all wired up and we had cameras on and all those sorts of things. And we thought we had a pretty good target. And we turned up at this fish factory, and two members of the military walked in. And you've never seen people walk themselves out of a situation so quickly in your life. The Thai military are not to be messed with.
LexisNexis is a proud sponsor of That's Just Criminal podcast. Remember, AI won't replace lawyers, but lawyers using AI will. Make LexisNexis your preferred legal AI research and productivity technology partner. Find out more at lexisnexis.co.nz. The That's Just Criminal podcast is proudly sponsored by the Criminal Bar Association of New Zealand. The CBA was set up in 1984 and provides support and collegiality to criminal practitioners in New Zealand, whether they are defence lawyers, prosecutors, judges, academics or students. For more information, visit www.criminalbar.org.nz. Now let's get back to the episode.
Is the people smuggling, was that for trafficking purposes, or was that smuggling people into immigrants that needed a home,
In that world, there was a lack of labour. Go out on the fishing boats, so people were being tricked onto vessels. And they were being offered contracts for certain jobs, and they were turning up and being sent off on vessels for long periods of time, sometimes 6 or 12 months, where they were terribly mistreated, underfed. People were dying on the boats, and they just get chucked overboard, and it would be reported as a person thrown overboard. There was a massive human trafficking operation that we looked at called Giant Ocean, and that was largely went unpunished. They worked out who the offenders were, and they were right back in the industry within a year or two.
What country was this in?
It was a mixture. So Taiwan, Cambodia, and Vietnam was sort of the prime. And a lot of the victims were from Indonesia and Vietnam. But there's also a real issue in the Pacific as well. And some of our Pacific neighbours have got some sort of real issues with some of these multinational corporates that are running fishing operations and being pretty exploitive.
Is anything like that been happening in New Zealand?
We certainly had issues with that. There were charter boats that were working for New Zealand fishing companies. Not too long ago, the law's changed now, it's more difficult, but we certainly had slaves in ports on boats in New Zealand that were fishing for New Zealand companies. So they were immigrant workers on chartered vessels flagged to another country working for New Zealand fishing companies. And, fishing is just one industry where we have those issues. If you're looking at sort of global supply chains, some of my colleagues do quite a lot of work in that area around global supply chains and looking at some risks around human trafficking and labour abuses.
What's the best job you've ever had?
In terms of work in New Zealand, Tainer's case, Alan Hall's case, Gale and Stevens' case, in terms of job satisfaction, it's hard to beat those.
Tim, is there any job that you would turn down?
I very rarely touch family law, just for a variety of reasons. But in terms of, is there anybody who's accused of something that I wouldn't work for? The answer is no. You either believe in the system or you don't. And this is something I say to some of my grumpy ex-police colleagues, like if you don't like the system, stop working in it or go into politics and try and change it. But you can't have it both ways. And I watched a movie many years ago, Devil's Advocate.
Oh, yeah.
Which it was when I was going through my liberalising period And I think that helped change the way I think about justice systems and how important a defence is for a person when you are prosecuted by the powerful.
When you say liberalising period, was there a period where you were not so liberal, or was that just when you're in the police?
I came from pretty sort of sheltered conservative background, and I can tell you the first year or two working in South Auckland shook me out of that. But it's pretty socially conservative in the police, apart from a couple of different parts of the culture that aren't, including alcohol. I started studying after I'd finished my detective training. I started studying towards a master's degree in criminology, and I think that was really challenging for me because I started reading all this evidence that suggested everything I thought was wrong, and it took it a little while to adjust to that and sort of rationalise why I was working on Drug Squad when the prohibition on drugs was so sort of class and race based in terms of the establishment of those laws and all the history that you don't learn about at police college. But it was through formal education I started to think a little bit differently and sort of became more progressive and liberal in my views. Liberal is probably not the right word, but maybe less conservative.
I know what you mean as well. It's like anyone that's come from a conservative background, you don't stop being friends with all your conservative people. You just have friends with different views that if you can have a robust
just have
discussion,
to bite your tongue at some point.
Yeah. Smile and nod sometimes, or be the unpopular person in the room sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And try and control your rage when that bubbles to the top.
Yeah.
But it's that tunnel vision, right? A lot of police officers have it, and we've talked about it. You think that you're doing the right thing by putting these people away. But there's another side to it, which we see.
Yeah, you don't see that when you're in the police, you don't see their trauma, you don't see their vulnerability, you don't see their background, you don't see the impact of what it means to somebody when you put them in handcuffs and put them in a cell for a day. You don't see that because you do it every day and you think it's normal. It's not normal, and it has a huge impact on people. Same when you pepper spray somebody or hit them with a bat or worse. You don't comprehend that. Nobody talks to you about that when you're in the police, and you don't see the damage that you do when you do those things. So
absolutely. And I mean, I always call arresting people state-sanctioned kidnapping because it's actually a horrifying thing to arrest someone, and that's even before you even then incarcerate them. It's like a massive breach of everybody's rights and should only be done, I think, in the strongest of circumstances.
I agree. And it's not something you even think about in the police. I hope training has changed since I went through training, but there were so many gaps in my knowledge of the system I was about to wade into when I started.
Yeah.
And looking at some of what I see now, I don't know if it's changed as much as it needs to.
Well, I think to be fair to the other side, there are police now that specialise, for example, in domestic violence. And I do a lot of work around women that commit crimes as a result of having been abused or in abusive relationships. And there are some amazing police that have a real understanding of control and coercion now. And I think they have special, certainly in South Auckland, they do special teams that are there to understand that women that have committed crimes are also victims first. And I think that's something that wasn't present 20 years ago when I was starting out.
Yeah, and I have friends that are really progressive and thoughtful and wonderful police officers, and we need to retain paying them. I don't think we pay them anywhere near enough. My message to the people that I deal with, is you just have to take each police officer as you find them, because like any other part of society, there's a real mixture and a great deal of variation.
I think you've just got to deal with every case as it comes. And I think that's something that some of the PIs that, some of the newer PIs that I've dealt with, one of the first things I say to them, like I said before, I'm like, you'll be surprised how much we have to do because the police aren't doing basics. And it doesn't seem to register with the PIs even then until they do a few cases. And then they come back and go, oh, I know what you mean. I see why you said they don't do basics.
I think that's a resourcing issue as well. It comes back to let's pay these people more and get better people.
Well, the job has become so much more complex than what it was when I joined with the technology and even our understanding of the frailties of the criminal justice system around identification, around false confessions. To do it well, it is an incredibly challenging job, and I think we should pay them well.
Police, nurses, teachers.
Yeah.
legal aid lawyers.
Or looking at it from a wider lens, it's understanding addiction, it's understanding mental health, poverty, like it's understanding all of those topics and how they feed into crime, rather than looking at crime in terms of it's just bad people doing bad things.
I agree. And so that's why there's such value in having diversity in not only the police force. I would argue one of the things we lack in New Zealand in our justice system is diversity in the judiciary. And I think that you see that in some of the judgments that come out. There's a real lack of understanding of the real world because of privilege and, education and all those sorts of things. I don't know. Well, I do know how you fix it, but it'll take a generation.
The judiciary is already getting so much more diverse, but it's bottom up. It's like with anything. So that's a very good point. And the other point I was going to say was when we all started out as well, methamphetamine was just coming into our country. There was one murder a year. And so, of course, now we've got really an epidemic and
Every day.
and murders all the time. So it's a completely different landscape, isn't it, from when you would have been a police officer?
Yeah, it is. It's changed. I mean, I was in one of the very first Plan Lab teams, and we were just sort of learning as we went. It's far more professionalised now, but it has changed the face of it. The problem I have is that we can't police our way out of it. And I did an interview a couple of years ago with Kylie Quince at AUT, and she talked about if you want to be tough on crime, be tough on poverty.
Yes.
And it's people who live helpless lives, who've got no hope. Society is incredibly tough on them, and they can be quite dysfunctional. And so our response to that as a society is to punish them.
Yeah.
So I don't
exactly.
know what you expect from punishment of people that are right at the bottom. We need to do a lot more as a country to deal with crime that's outside of the criminal justice system.
And the causes of the crime as opposed to the crime. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a defence lawyer that would disagree with that.
We have set the world to rights now.
We've solved crime, we've solved police issues, we've solved poverty.
Tim McKinnel, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been incredibly interesting and it went places we didn't know it was going to go.
Had a wonderful time. I hope it hasn't gone into too darker places. No, appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, Sumudu, I think Tim needs his own podcast, or even some of the stories he touched on, we just need to do a whole episode on
it. Yeah, I think definitely the Greenpeace thing should be like a 3-episode podcast. It's so interesting that I guess the path his career has taken, it's not just criminal law.
Yeah. So I think he is very close to being my favourite private investigator.
Oh, don't tell your normal PI that.
Normal PI.
Normal PI. See, I will have to confess to my normal PI that I might have another favourite PI.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to That's Just Criminal. We're sponsored by the Criminal Bar Association and LexisNexis New Zealand.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.